it's Phil. Welcome back to the show. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, I get first billing today.
Hi, Christian.
Hi.
You're purple from the waist up.
I am.
Purple.
I'm wearing my Snuggie.
Purple. Oh, hey, you've got tassels.
I know.
You've got a tassel
I've
on
got
your
two.
cloak.
And a matching water bottle.
You're Jewish.
This
But
came
you only
from
have one.
No, I
there's
don't.
another one. Two tassels. Do you have four?
two. It's an
You're half Jewish.
It's an asymmetrical cape thingy from
Really?
the island of Capri in Italy. Or Capri,
Of course.
or whatever they call
Isn't
it.
the whole island asymmetrical? Is that why the capes are
I
asymmetrical?
think so. And you're here with Sky.
And apparently a large half-Jewish population as
Yes.
well.
There are Jews there,
Really?
I would think.
Are they half circumcised?
I would hope not.
Kai.
What?
Yeah, where did that come
There are
from?
children
anyway?
in the audience. Mom, what's it mean to be half circumcised? And Sky Jitani.
Hi. Happy to contribute.
People say to me all the time how much they love your one-liners under your breath that we like that go right over our head.
Whatever.
We've learned to tune them out.
Yes, you have.
Just like you and my theme song. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So in here, the Phil Fisher podcast starts right here. Oh, we'll talk to Sky.
Hi.
Who's on his phone? He's not even listening.
And Christian, too.
Hi, Phil. I'm here.
And we've got a guest on the line, the video phone. What do we call it? On the phone. Not on the phone, on the video
On the feed.
conference feed call here for you. And his name is Brandon, and he was here once before, but it was a long, long time ago before some of you were born. Hey, it's a podcast. Celinda here. The Phil Fisher podcast starts right here. The Phil Fisher podcast starts right here. Do you think any children of our listeners are now becoming fans that weren't born when we launched?
No, because they'd only be 5. So no, I doubt they're listening.
Are you saying it is categorically impossible that we could have a 5-year-old fan?
Yes, I am.
That's disheartening.
Hey, by the way, we have a live studio audience today.
We do. We have a live studio audience of 2.
Of 2.
All the way from a town whose name I don't remember,
Tremont, Illinois.
but it's a suburb of Peoria.
Peoria has suburbs?
Tremont.
I have declared it so.
Okay.
Tremont.
Tremont. Next to Morton.
Next to Morton. That doesn't
Southern
help
Illinois.
anybody.
It does if you like Route 66.
Oh, it's on Route 66.
Mm-hmm.
You're on Route 66 where they get their kicks. Okay, that's fantastic. And we have a guest. So we have an audience, so they'll, I'm sure, chime in often.
Please laugh. Feel free.
Yeah, laugh loudly and long and at all the wrong parts. And we have a guest. Brandon O'Brien is here. He is an author. He is a biblical scholar. He was here on episode, we had to research this because my memory is not great now that I'm a grandfather. He was on episode 14.
There you go.
Now,
Episode 14.
when will we have our
Birthday?
Our 5th birthday. But I was trying to think of what do
mitzvah?
you call those? Like
The 5th birthday?
Yeah, like
Anniversary?
Sesquicentennial.
that's what I was like a name like that. What
That's
do you call it?
That's 150.
Yeah, that's 150.
Oh,
What do you
as
call
close as I
5?
could come up with. to
Cinco
5.
something or other.
Cinco
or,
de Mayo.
No,
when are
that's-
we going to have our Cinco de Mayo?
It's sesquicentennial. That's
That's
100.
it?
That's 150.
No, what's
Yeah,
5?
I know.
What's 5?
What is a 5-year anniversary?
Yeah,
It's your 5th anniversary.
there's got to be something cooler than that.
No, it isn't.
Okay, well,
And what
there
do you
should
give?
be.
What do you give your spouse on the 5th year anniversary?
I
Good
can look
question.
Hey,
Is
hey Siri. What do you give on your 5th anniversary?
Okay, give me a moment.
Oh, so stupid.
Web search turns something up for what are you give on your 5th anniversary.
What are you give?
All right, I'm telling you that Alexa is way better than Siri.
Yeah, I believe you.
I'm just
Hey, we're
saying.
not going to
Why
get
is
into
your
partisan
Siri
politics.
a man? That is disconcerting.
Yeah.
Why is my Siri a man?
Shouldn't you call him
Yes.
Ciro?
I think we'll get into that with Brandon about Paul and why Paul had certain things about, because a woman should not give instructions to a man.
Oh,
Okay.
My phone is very reformed.
Before we get to, does it have an answer yet?
Hold on, I'm getting there. You do your thing. Wood.
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 Yeah.
Wood. Okay, like a baseball bat.
Wood-
you give your wife a baseball
Wood
bat.
is all the rage right now, and I can tell you that because I am rehabbing this wonderful home.
Wood is the rage.
It
When has
is.
wood not been the rage? That would have been like
I don't know. They couldn't
Well,
have
there
made
was
Stone
boats
Age.
No, there
without
was
it.
the Jetsons era where we thought houses in the future were going to be made entirely of plastic, and a few companies tried to make plastic houses.
And metal.
Mostly plastic.
Wood did kind of fall out of, favor.
It wasn't. People weren't decorating. Well, nah, that was kind of always in
Gold
favor.
wood, I think, was kind of
Goldwood.
Goldwood?
Yeah, gold-plated
Was
wood.
that
The James Bond
Yeah,
villain.
that was a James Bond film. I know, Goldwood.
Goldwood. With
Okay.
I won't name her name.
Okay, can we do a news? Did you? No, we got the answer.
Do you have any
it's
news?
Wood.
It's wood.
There's just
Yeah.
no news. It's been so
No.
boring.
Oh, that was fantastic news.
Yeah,
All right,
right.
let's hear it.
Visiting Disney World is the modern version of making a medieval pilgrimage.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Thank you.
Especially for you, who goes every year.
The authors will be glad to know that Sky agrees with them.
At least in the American consumeristic religion.
According to anthropologists, religious studies experts, and art historians, I almost said heart historians. Art historians, most Disney patrons would probably call their trip a vacation, but to anthropologists, religious studies experts, and art historians, a visit to Disney World looks a lot like another older form of travel, a pilgrimage, especially when you have to go the last mile on your knees to get through security. Disney
Is
World.
that a thing?
No. For pilgrimages,
You have to
yes.
go on your knees?
In some cases. Up the stairs, on your knees.
I got profiled. I told you about this when we were at Disney World last year. Every single time I walked into the
That's
park.
because you look like
Yeah.
a terrorist.
It is. I didn't even have the goatee then.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think.
It's worse now.
I know. You should, yeah.
And you've got to stop speaking Arabic with your kids in public places. They find it amusing.
speak
The
Arabic.
rest of us don't.
I do not speak
Even if
Arabic.
you speak like an Indian, they could think that you
Why
were
would I do that?
Pakistani.
Why would I do that?
Because your accent's hilarious.
Yeah, but I don't walk around town pretending I have an accent
I've heard you do it.
around town.
Okay, not around
You
town.
walk around town pretending you don't have an accent, which is what you're doing right now. But you do it well. Disney World resembles a medieval pilgrimage center designed to connect pilgrims with the supernatural, represented by Mickey Mouse and company. So Mickey is the deity.
Oh, Mickey's the deity,
Yes.
huh?
By exploring the sections of the park, visitors can symbolically pass through time and enact different parts of the American ideal. Traditional pilgrimage centers evoke the supernatural, or at least mythic, heroic past. Walt Disney World does both.
Can I speak to that?
Have you seen
Yes,
the
speak to it.
Okay, so when I was 7, my parents took us
Yeah.
to Disney World,
Okay.
and we stayed in an Airstream trailer in Fort Wilderness.
Whoa.
Our favorite vacation ever. But what I remember was going to Space Mountain, which was new. And
Yeah.
at the end, when you came out, it was Tomorrowland or Futureville or
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
that's your book.
They had
Tomorrow was it Tomorrowland?
there were some tableaus of the future.
Right. And I
Yes.
remember my dad going through there and
Mm-hmm.
showing me this woman in her kitchen ordering her groceries.
All plastic.
And, yep. And
No
then,
wood.
No wood. And then a living room area where there was a disc playing and
Yeah.
like a movie on the screen.
Yeah.
And he said, when you are grown up, you will order your groceries from your kitchen and you will watch things on this,
Really?
disc. Yes, that's what they had there.
And you'll elect Donald Trump. Did he say
He
that?
never said that. but anyway, now when I go back there, it's
Yeah.
still kind of like that. They've
little
changed
bit,
that
yeah,
end,
yeah.
but it feels like I'm walking into the 70s.
I remember, I don't know when this was, I think early married, so probably 20 years ago, going through, and one of the scenes coming off Space Mountain was the future, and it was a kid with his birthday cake, and his grandparents
Yeah.
were singing to him, and they were on the moon, and like his sister or somebody was singing to him, and she was at the bottom of the ocean living in a habitat of some kind, and the kid was alone.
Oh, that's very sad.
Oh, it was all on
It's
screens.
very sad.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it was just depressing. And that was about the time then the AT&T came out with the commercial. That it was their You Will series of commercials. And they said, and one of them was, have you ever tucked in your child from a payphone? You will.
Oh, gosh.
And I remember thinking, that's the creepiest thing I've
Yeah.
ever heard. I will not. And you can't make me, AT&T.
All right, so when you walk
Okay.
into Disney World,
Yes.
or Disney, the Magic Kingdom, there's this plaque over the entrance. Have you seen this?
Yes.
Yes.
It's for those of you who can't see my phone. It says, "Here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy." So it really is. It's you're entering into a sacred space that is
Yep, but there's
set
more.
apart.
There's more that these experts are coming up with. As in Disney World, in the middle of the park, and this is talking about some other walled sites that are pilgrimages, a castle draws the eye up toward the sky. The spire is the key thing that marks the sacred access. As the altar has the cross on it, the spire goes up toward the heavens. When you go to Disneyland, you're given the opportunity to actually meet Mickey. He's walking right along the street. Minnie's right behind him. Main Street is always sparkling. In the sacred space of Disney, the fantastical is made real. Visitors can see and touch these unreal and magical symbols just as a medieval pilgrim could see a relic, perhaps touch the reliquary that contained
what?
it.
Yeah, but the difference
Reliquary.
is
Reliquary.
at Disney, like you're not just going to touch like Mickey's missing finger that is now preserved in some special.
Wouldn't that be great?
And
We have
you
the second
actually,
knuckle bone of Mickey Mouse.
because he's only got 4 fingers, right?
Yeah.
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 But you actually get to
Right.
meet the characters. That's part
Right.
of the fun.
That they're still living.
Yeah. Oh, and now the girls love these
But now,
princesses.
okay, so
You can have like a tea party in the castle
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the
yeah,
princesses.
you can stay.
You can
if
stay.
you're rich enough.
Yeah.
you can stay above.
I would love
just
to
like
do
selling indulgences
It
back
is,
in the day.
but this is what there are some critics. Deborah Parr. Do you know who she is? You probably don't. Let me tell you. She's the associate professor of art and design history at Columbia College in Chicago.
Ooh.
Okay, so you don't know who she is. If you think of how the sacred is treated in many religions, there's a tendency to create a space that's demarcated from profane space. But what happens inside Disneyland is this microcosm of capitalism and all kinds of profane activities. So
that. Sounds like Sky.
she
She must have copied Sky.
So her point is, yes, it's a pilgrimage, but it actually celebrates the profane, all these capitalistic.
Well, if you call the capitalistic things profane.
Oh, your father must have been in the Reagan administration.
Well, guilty as
I mean,
charged.
she has a point. I mean, strictly speaking, profane and sacred means profane means ordinary or things you do in your ordinary life, and sacred
Yeah.
are activities or things you only engage in a sacred.
I thought it meant dirty and holy.
Well, not exactly. So when
Dirty,
you think about it, we
dirty
spend
theme
money all the time. We shop all the time. We buy things all the time. That's ordinary activity.
Yeah.
You could also say it's mundane or profane.
Yeah.
But the fact that you do the same thing inside Disney World, she's saying, well, that's not really sacred because it's a profane activity.
Right.
But I would argue it really isn't, because in the real world, you don't spend $25 for, a bottled water.
Yeah.
But you get the honor of spending that much money for the same lousy
Right.
bottled water at Disneyland, which makes it a sacred activity.
How is that not a profanity?
Well, I think it is. But
$25
people that's when I went last year.
Well,
'Cause I don't,
profanity is different than profane, apparently.
I don't go as frequently as you do, Phil, but I was kind of struck.
No one goes as frequently as Phil does.
This was the first time when I went last year where I was struck by who was actually there. Like the other people, my other pilgrims,
Yeah.
as we all went to Disney World, because how do I put this nicely?
Oh, here we go.
Well,
You being politically correct?
I'm trying to be
so
nice.
shocked.
Let me just. It was not the. It's not the same people that you might find at an art museum.
No.
Or a health club?
or a Trader Joe's.
Or Trader Joe's. Yeah. I mean, it was
slightly more.
Or at Harvard and Yale? I mean, are we
I don't
dividing
know.
these down
I've not been to
economic
Harvard or
and
Yale. I've not been to Harvard or Yale.
So it's not filled
Educational
with
lines?
not filled with the elites. Is that
Right,
it was
that's
definitely
where I
not
was
the
going.
elites.
Yeah.
But you could tell that for a lot of these families, this was like high culture. This was their
High culture.
Yeah, like
no,
this-
they wouldn't refer to it that way.
no, because they wouldn't. But
but
for
it's
them,
just their favorite thing.
well,
We're offending half our audience now.
I'm saying like some people go, well, we're going to take the kids to Europe and we're going to visit,
Yeah.
history and monuments and
Right.
and there's other people who go, well, we're going to take them to the UK at Epcot because that's kind of their,
Yeah.
we want to be Americans and that's what Americans do. There are a lot of people who say America without pronouncing the A.
I'm
Let's
sure
put it
we're
that way.
offending someone, but I can't figure out who.
Oh, I know who.
Like
I think
it was
they're
just
all related to me.
But it was
Yeah.
fascinating to
Yeah.
see, but I'm probably saying this the wrong way.
You're
Like
are.
this,
Really stepping in it.
A Disney vacation. We have a ton of fun there. I'm not knocking it. We'll go back, no
Yeah.
doubt. But like for some people, I think it is a highly aspirational vacation.
Right.
Well, how are you different than them?
Because I wouldn't consider Disney World like the highlight of my travel experience or ambitions.
Because you have to take
But the
your
thing
kids to all
is,
sorts
you
of
have
exotic
the
places.
opportunity.
Here's what.
you have
I know what you're about to say.
What am I about to say?
It's not people don't have the money to do what I would do.
Not necessarily money, but you have the opportunity
because you get invited to speak.
Well, no, but that's different.
No, it isn't different.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Because
People are not just going to say if you don't really know a place, it's much more challenging hear me out.
All right.
It's much more challenging in so many ways to pick up and go to another culture that's very different.
Yeah.
If you are not familiar with international travel or how to take international trains or the money or the language.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Fine.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: a family of 5, we did not spend this much money, but we easily could have. A family of 5 could easily spend $10,000 going to Disney
Absolutely.
World. If I have $10,000 sitting around to do something with my family that involved traveling, Disney World would not be anywhere near the top of my list.
Right, but you're doing things that are inherently riskier, that are more likely. Like I'm going to spend this $10,000 to drag my kids across India from one end to another.
Fine.
That sounds like something that could either turn out wonderfully or horribly.
You could take a Mediterranean cruise with your family of 5 for $10,000.
Yeah, the cruises are kind of boring.
But you could visit historical
But my point
places.
is-
you could
okay,
be
look.
totally comfortable and safe, and with a bunch of other Americans.
Will Mickey be there?
You're missing.
Yeah, you could do a Disney cruise.
You're missing the point.
All right.
So, 2 years ago, I planned this whole trip on my own to Italy because my son wanted to go because he had studied it since 5th grade. He wanted to go. It was very daunting. Very daunting to think that I knew nothing, had never traveled abroad, and I had to figure it all out. And I think that can be overwhelming to a lot of people.
Well, there are a lot
that
of
aren't,
easier
haven't
ways
traveled.
to do that with prepackaged things and other. I mean, there are ways to do it there. So
I know that.
I would just.
And that's what I call Epcot.
Yes, that is a very low bar. My point is, the popular American imagination is not inspired with the idea of taking the family overseas to
Adventure.
experience a different culture.
Adventure.
Right.
They are
Right.
captivated by the imagination of going to Disney World and spending $10,000 to have a princess breakfast. And that's fine. I mean, I like Disney World. It's a lot of fun.
I do think that has a lot to do with us being very ethnocentric.
I'm not sure it's ethnocentric as much as it is our imaginations have been shaped and captivated by popular media. And the movies we watch and the stories we've been told all throughout our lives have come from Disney. And wow, you can go and actually meet these people.
Yeah, well, I also might want to take my kids to Islands of Adventure at Universal where they could meet some Marvel characters that aren't
And Harry
allowed yet to
Potter.
be at Disney World.
Now, you know what? That what you just said, Sky, rings true with me. Because when I was little, my mother read me George MacDonald and C.S. Lewis, and I grew up hearing about them personally, sort of their biographies and where they studied and all of that. So I used to dream of going and seeing where the Inklings used to gather and, the kilns and stuff like that. So you're right.
Now we want to go to where Harry Potter and Hermione, defeated Voldemort or
Pretended
whatever.
that they
Right.
did something.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
All right, now we totally got off track on
so
your
did
article.
we-
What were you planning to talk about?
Most Americans don't know what an actual religious pilgrimage is. It's just
That's why I
completely
said,
beyond
what's
our
the whole knee
experience.
thing?
Most of the rest of the world does, though, especially the Islamic world, certainly knows what a pilgrimage is because it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Can you
gotta
explain
do a
it?
Pilgrimage.
What?
Pilgrimage is when you go to a site that has religious significance.
Right, but I
for
mean,
religious
do you
reasons.
do it every year?
Oh, you
do
mean
you
for
do
Muslims?
it
Oh,
once
you have
in your
to
life?
do it once in your lifetime.
Okay,
All able-bodied Muslims.
All able-bodied.
you're required.
All able-bodied.
Or you're not a
Well,
good
you're supposed,
Muslim.
you're
Or
supposed
you've
to
broken
take
a
the
pillar.
Hajj.
You've broken one of the 5 pillars.
And is there
it will
like a
fall
route
on your
that you have
family.
to go? Because when I hear the word pilgrimage, it sounds like you have to travel
No,
by
you
this
got to
way.
go to Mecca, but once you're there, there's things you
It
do.
all starts in Hoboken. And then you go single file
Okay.
to to the mall. And then you go, there's a Dunkin' Donuts, and you go behind the Dunkin' Donuts, and that's where the buses pick you up to go to the airport, typically LaGuardia. And then you go to...
I'll tell you the other place I've been that felt like a pilgrimage,
What?
where I was definitely not a holy
the
person.
Bears game.
No, the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Oh, Cooperstown.
In Cooperstown. Like we were, that's a whole story. But a lot of people who really worship baseball, it is a pilgrimage.
That's so true.
Do you think we Christians, we modern middle American Christians, need a religious pilgrimage? Is there a pilgrimage-shaped hole in our lives that we're stuffing with Disney World? That we should be stuffing with something else.
I can answer that. I can answer that because Sky wrote a book called Futureville, and I read it, and it talked about the future heavenly city, and it sounded a lot like Disney World.
But that's future. Like now.
I know, but we're.
I clearly failed.
Sky painted it to sound almost as good as Disney World. Good try, Jesus.
No, my point is, it sounded wonderful and beautiful and clean and
but
like the happiest place on earth.
That's not a pilgrimage. That's our ultimate destination.
Right.
Is there a role of pilgrimage in Christianity?
Brandon would probably be better at answering this because he studied church history so much.
Guest.
But I think that one thing that pilgrimage does is it infuses sacredness into physical space. And the idea that we want to make something of this world sacred and we want to use our bodies in our worship. And in a lot of evangelicalism in particular, we have this dualism that says physical, material world is bad and it's only the immaterial world that matters, which is wholly unbiblical, but that's a popular idea that's held. So I think what pilgrimage does is it helps infuse this world and physicality with sacredness. So I'd say, we do need that in some capacity, and a lot of our tradition of the church doesn't reward that.
Have you ever been to the Holy Land Experience in Orlando?
No.
Oh, in Orlando?
Yeah.
I thought you were really going to say in Israel.
No, it's a little theme park.
Is it still open?
I don't know if it's still open.
Live your lives in theme parks?
It's now owned by the Trinity Broadcast Network.
Yeah, but I thought that got scuttled a long time ago.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
And?
Yeah, I was hired to consult on it at one point to see if it could become more child-friendly.
And?
Yes, it could.
So did they stop the scourgings in the middle of the square?
Interesting things there. I don't know what they do anymore. They have a scale model of Jerusalem.
Just a model?
Yeah, well, no, Jerusalem was big in the day.
No, but I mean,
it's
they
still
didn't
big.
recreate Jerusalem so that you could walk down the streets.
You can walk down, there are Jerusalem-y
it's not a model that you look at on a table.
Is it like the Via Della Rosa?
There's also a model of the entire city of Jerusalem that's about 20 feet by 10 feet.
Okay.
Or so, and that they give you tours of and have lighting effects.
Tours of? How do they give
like
you tours
the city
of?
You walk around the sides and they point at stuff with a stick.
It sounds like the museum one of Chicago. Remember in the you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Museum of Science and Industry that has the train and the city. Is it like that?
Yeah, there was no train in ancient Israel.
Well, I know, but is it like that?
They could do that so much better with VR now.
Yeah, but
it's not as tangible.
VR separates us into our own little cocoons of virtual reality.
People would say it would immerse you.
Having a big model in a room like a trade show, that brings us together as a people.
Okay, so you're saying this Holy Land experience was not so great, not so holy.
I certainly made no declarative statements such as that.
He only said it could be more child-friendly.
Okay. But what else would we make a pilgrimage to?
The Holy Land.
Some Christians would make
The Holy Land.
The real Holy Land?
The real Holy Land.
The real Holy Land?
I would like to go see the tomb. Do you know, I just saw this,
What?
that in the tomb of Jesus, they started excavating it.
On the escalators?
Nope. They started excavating it, and they found the slab where he was laying.
How do they know?
Because they carbon dated.
Did it say Jesus was here?
No, they data tested it.
No.
They saw his shadow.
That's a whole long story. Because he left his shroud there.
So I would like to go there.
Now.
Exactly.
That doesn't exist.
What?
Well,
the shroud?
Not real. I know it exists, but
It may
it's not
be
real.
It may be real. They don't know that it's not real.
Most people think it's not
Let's
real.
see how many topics we
There
can
are
cover.
there are so many places Christians could pilgrimage to.
Yeah?
Yeah?
Name another one.
Well, we just did. There's the Shroud of Turin. There are
okay.
great sites throughout Europe of the Reformation
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah, but we need one.
What? Focus on the family headquarters in Colorado Springs. There's a big slide.
Well,
Or what about that cross on the way to like Indiana?
In
Do you know what I'm talking
the
about?
giant Indiana
The-
cross.
there's one in
Yeah.
Illinois, though, isn't there?
It's in Indiana.
Maybe.
I drove past one in Illinois.
What about going to Rio de Janeiro and going up to the Jesus on the
Oh,
hill?
yeah,
Is
that's-
that a pilgrimage?
Christ the Redeemer?
Is that a pilgrimage?
Yeah, I can't-
or
Well, you know,
is that
now
just
the
a tourist
Catholic
attraction?
Church has a lot of pilgrimages to where
I went to Westminster Abbey.
Yes, I've
like
been there.
like where they've seen visions of Mary, like
Yeah.
Medjugorje.
Yeah.
Those are pilgrimages.
Okay. We could go to Azusa Street where the revival started.
What about personal pilgrimage, where you go back to places that were deeply significant in your own life
That's
and
an
forming?
interesting
Muscatine
idea.
General Hospital, where I was born.
There you go.
That doesn't work
Well,
for
you
me.
take one every year.
to Disney World.
No,
Where?
Okoboji.
Okoboji.
Okoboji. That's a pilgrimage. Okay, I think we should probably
What are we
talk to
supposed
our
to be
guests.
talking
Yeah,
about
we
today?
Brandon O'Brien, have you ever taken what would qualify as a religious pilgrimage?
I don't believe so. I have been to the Holy Lands, not the one in Orlando.
Okay. so
You've,
it's a
you've been
real
to
one.
Wheaton.
And,
I've been to Wheaton.
That
That's
kinda
true.
counts.
and
Yes.
did your trips to Israel feel at all pilgrimage like?
Yeah, I think when Sky was speaking about the contribution of a pilgrimage, what struck me is that there were places. We were actually in Turkey and Greece, and in those places there are a handful of locations where you can stand and you know that the Apostle Paul walked under this arch, or he was arrested on this street and carried through that gate into this theater. And I think because in the West we're divided by time from the Bible, but also by several thousand miles, and it really kind of, I think the force of the New Testament hit me a little differently when you could sit there and say, well, I guess you could debate whether or not Jesus is the Son of God or the Bible is the
Right.
Word of God, but these things happened in this place 2,000 years ago, and we can see it.
Right.
And so I think that's for me, it was a significant moment of, after a season of doubt, I think, to be able to stand in those places and and catch a new vision or imagination.
So the only equivalent we really have in North America is we can all go to upstate New York and become closer to the Book of Mormon.
Oh my.
That's
That would be bad.
Hey, there have been significant religious movements in North America.
revivals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but not as foundational as Paul was here.
Well, no, clearly.
Yeah.
I do think that's hard because there is such a different experience over there in the Middle East, from how they live to how they eat, and it is so much more similar than what we read about in the Bible. And it couldn't be more different than what we live every day. And I think if we could experience that, the Bible would be a little bit more relatable in the
Yeah.
Old Testament.
Right. Okay, but we really do need to get.
Go ahead.
We really do need to get. So the last time Brandon was on the show, it was on episode number 14. What episode is this now? What are we on now?
I was wondering that
Today?
myself.
235. So you were on
Wow.
220 episodes ago. Wow.
We've gotten old.
Yeah, we've all grown old together, haven't we? And we had him on for his first book. Was that your first book? Is this your second book, or do you have other books we don't know about?
This is number 3. That was number 2.
What was
Look at
number
that.
1?
It was called The Strategically Small Church.
I remember
But
that.
it does not surprise me that you haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
Because it was a strategically small book.
Everyone's so excited about their church being small. They ran right out and
It
bought
was a good book. I wasn't thrilled with the cover design.
Okay.
It was a really
Well,
good book.
let's not, that might be a sore point with Brandon.
Brandon didn't do the
We
cover.
don't need to bring that up.
Oh,
Okay.
were you part of it
Water under
because
the
you were
bridge.
at Christianity
Yeah, well,
Today?
he was writing it while we were colleagues, and I thought it was a really
Oh,
valuable
he can weigh
book.
in there.
It was a great book.
Brandon's second book, this was also co-written with Randy Richards?
Yes, it
was.
was.
Okay. Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, about how we are so good at interpreting the Bible better than anyone ever has before because we're Western. and we're so logical.
Exactly.
Something like
It's
that.
something like that.
Yeah. We talked about that on podcast 14. You can go back and listen to it, but it's how we often misinterpret things. 9 key areas where modern Westerners have significantly different assumptions about what might be going on in the text because we are so far from it in time and place. Can you just give a couple highlights for the people who have no idea what we're talking about from that book that might make them want to go back and listen to episode 14 or maybe even buy your book and give you a nickel?
Sure. Yeah. We'd appreciate the nickels on account of the strategically small church being relatively unknown. Yeah. So Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes was sort of an effort. Randy was a missionary for about 10 years in Indonesia. And I, my background's in church history, which is kind of the cheapest cross-cultural experience you can get because you can read things written by people who think very differently because of their historical context and location. So we were coming to some similar conclusions different ways and realized there were there's a lot of literature out there really in the last 50 years about how American readers and especially white male middle class readers get the Bible wrong because of all the things we take for granted. But there's not a lot out there about really how do you fix it? So sure, maybe we get it wrong, but how could we get it right? And so we identified 9 patterns. They're not the only 9, surely, but they are things that we kind of consistently do because of where we read from. And things like the way we understand language, because most of us only speak one language. So make certain assumptions about language, how we think about race, because we live in 21st century America, which is allegedly post-racial, and any number of other things that kind of cause us to import our worldview back into the Bible. And our goal is really to be constructive, to help people say, if I'm aware of these things that I get wrong, then maybe I'll be less likely to get wrong with practice.
Right. And how in general, how was the book received? Did people appreciate it, or did it annoy anyone?
Oh, well, it has annoyed some people, sure. I enjoy periodically getting on the Amazon book reviews and, maybe recording new insults that people have lodged at us.
Because they're mad that you're implying that we get things wrong?
Yeah, I think that it's real easy when you push people in a direction for them to think that you're trying to push them all the way off the edge. We're really just kind of nudging them toward, I think, a broader perspective on the scriptures. But I think some of what we were said by some people sounds like we're advocating for a liberal approach to the Bible, like we're questioning that the Bible is true, and we never question that. We just question whether we get it right. And that for some people is the same thing. So, but mostly it's been well received. So
cool. So that's Misreading.
I've developed a thicker skin.
Yeah, so are we.
Haven't we all?
Not all of us.
That's Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. The new book is called Paul Behaving Badly. Did you ever consider calling it Paul Gone Wild?
I really would have liked to, yes.
Is that an alternative?
It's a good cover, Brandon.
It's
Just
a good
want you to
cover.
know.
Yeah,
I approve. I
Come a long
approve.
way.
Much better than that first one. Oh.
And I do appreciate the fact that you are depicting Paul as a bald man, which is actually historically accurate.
How would you know?
Please.
Because we haven't found his body, but we found some of his hair.
Okay, is there anything in the archaeological record or historical documents about Paul other than the Bible?
What? To prove that he existed?
Yes.
What are you looking for,
Like, so
lady? Or that he was bald?
No, not that he was bald, but that, he was saying that Paul was arrested here or walked under this arch. I mean, like, how do we really know that? Do we have any proof that he actually existed?
Well, that's a great question. We've got several letters that he wrote in the New Testament, and
other than that, outside the Bible.
You don't count the Bible. Okay. Well, there's a handful of references to Paul in the very earliest Christian literature after the New Testament, and so there are a couple of people who wrote at the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, were probably disciples of Paul, friends of Paul's. But what's interesting, they actually don't really make a whole lot of fuss about him. They say that he was, I think my favorite quote was that he is an example of patient suffering, which I think maybe means he was hard-headed, and that was a nice way to say it. But I think that American Christians really do put Paul front and center in a way that the earliest Christians didn't. They talked about Jesus and Jesus' example, whereas we tend to go to Paul first when we have Bible questions. But I don't know that there's never really been any debate, as far as I know, about Paul's existence.
And if he had friends, then he must have existed.
Right.
Because no one has friends who didn't exist.
Barney does.
Oh,
Barney's the one that doesn't exist.
you wiseacre. Okay.
So, no, but even liberal scholars don't
There's not a whole
discount
lot of dispute.
Paul's existence.
No.
They don't discount Jesus' existence. They'll argue about what they said or did, but there's not been any real dispute.
The
about it.
Apostle Paul was kind of a jerk. This is how.
That's the start of the book.
That's how the book starts out.
Just
He was arrogant and stubborn. He called his opponents derogatory, racist names. He legitimized slavery and silenced women. He was a moralistic, homophobic killjoy who imposed his narrow religious views on others.
He might take umbrance with this beginning,
this sounds
If he existed.
if he did.
this sounds like MSNBC's description of Republicans.
And then the next line, or was he?
Dun dun dun.
Da, da, da. And then I can't put it down. I'm hooked.
Wow.
I'm hooked right. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Why'd you write this book? Because Paul's a jerk, or because too many people are walking around saying Paul's a jerk?
Well, maybe a little of both. I think that there are two great books IVP published, God Behaving Badly by David Lamb, and Mark
So you
Strauss
just copied them.
released one called Jesus Behaving Badly a couple years ago.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a whole Behaving Badly series.
We could
Whole series,
make their
yeah.
list, maybe.
Yeah, maybe someday we'll be on there.
You definitely will be on there. The two of you, not me, of course.
So did you propose this idea, or did they come to you and say, hey, would you like to extend our series of hot-selling Behaving Badly books?
We should do pastors behaving badly. I mean, that could be a mini series.
That writes itself.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
That's old history.
Yeah, so our editors at Paul our editors at IVP approached us about the Paul behaving badly after misreading scripture with Western eyes. And Randy's background, he's a Pauline scholar, so this was sort of
right up his
coming
alley.
home for him.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's I think a lot of times when people quote their objections to Christianity these days,
Yeah.
you don't really have much problem with Jesus. Sometimes you do, but not a lot. More often you have problem with genocide or genocide in the Old Testament, and then you have issues with Paul. And
Yeah,
so I think we're not necessarily writing a book of apologetics, but I think for me it was really interesting because it's a way to take head on some of the most challenging objections that people have to the gospel.
So here are the chapter titles. Paul was kind of a jerk. Paul was a killjoy. Paul was a racist. Paul supported slavery. Paul was a chauvinist. Paul was homophobic. Paul was a hypocrite. Paul twisted scripture. Okay, going over those, the ones, because I spent my lunch today reading 3 of these chapters, the ones that most intrigued me, which were Paul supported slavery, Paul was a chauvinist, and Paul was homophobic. I wanted to see what you had to say on those. Those are the fun ones.
Should we set the timer? You have 60 seconds, Brandon.
Yeah, explain.
Defend Paul's
I noticed
chauvinism.
that you
But I thought the kind of the format of the way you structured the chapter addressing Paul as a chauvinist, I thought was kind of telling for how you approached it in general. So could we just pick that one and unpack it so we can get a feel for what you guys are up to here?
Sure.
Okay, Paul is a chauvinist. People say that. Why?
So the way we essentially organize each chapter, each argument is we do our best to make the best case against Paul. And in a lot of cases, especially with things like Paul's view of women, we've got lots of material. couple hundred years at least, and sometimes longer worth of objections to the things that he wrote. And so we try to make the argument against Paul from history and then also just from scripture. Here are the things that he actually said.
Right.
And kind of put those on the scale.
So women should be silent in church, or if they have questions, they should ask their husbands.
That's right.
Yeah, should cover their heads. They should be submissive. Christians should never interrupt Phil on the podcast. Things that Paul said.
Siri should be a man.
Siri should be a man. Am I missing any big ones?
No, those are the main ones. And then there are a handful of things that I think read as more subtle slights where men in the church are who are going to be overseers are expected to be reputable and honest and dignified, and women are supposed to not drink too much and not be talkers. There's the sort of
it's a lower bar.
The implication exactly. The implication is that women are just not only should be submissive, but should be submissive because they have less to contribute. And I think that's what the real challenge is it's not, if you read Paul a certain way, it's not that he's talking about different roles. He really is talking about different status if you read him.
Yeah.
Don't get any ideas.
No, I'm not an idea person.
Phil's not a chauvinist.
I don't get ideas.
I'm joking. Of course he is.
Of course he is.
No. Okay, so Brandon, how do you respond to those objections to Paul?
Yeah, well, now how do you go about responding? Not even what's your response, but what do you do to develop a clearer picture?
Sure. So this chapter, what we did is we sort of lay out here are the things that Paul says. Here are just the words that he uses, and do our best to kind of summarize the data based on, or an argument based on that data. And then we back up and say, well, how is what Paul said in his letters similar to or different from things that Romans said in the first century about women and that Jews said about women in the first century? And it's kind of everybody he would have interacted with, his Jewish audience and Roman audience. And then we try to compare, is Paul basically bound by his culture? Is he just saying the same things that they're saying? Or is he a product of his culture in the sense that, there are certain similarities, but he's actually transcending his culture by saying things about women that no one at the time
right. So for example, is he being less restrictive in what he says about women, or is he being more restrictive than the culture that he's writing out of? Is there a trajectory to what he's saying?
Correct. Yeah. So in that chapter, actually the chapter on slavery, women, and Paul's view of homosexuality, we use what's now a kind of an old, maybe 10-year-old argument called the trajectory theory, which is to kind of say, if Paul's culture was at a fixed point and then Paul's was a little beyond that point, did Paul give us the sort of end that he wanted everybody to live up to, or is he sort of pushing us along? He carried the ball so far, and now he's handing it off for future generations to continue to improve the status of slaves or women.
In that approach, there's an implication that we can't just tell me if I'm wrong, that we can't just say Paul is defining exactly the way it should be, and all we need to do is do exactly what Paul says?
Yeah, I think it requires some nuance and some really wrestling with the text to make sure that you are extending. If we think Paul is using the gospel to extend the right of women, for example, or the role of women in culture and religion, then is our job to keep extending it, or has he shown us the extent of that? Right. And if we're supposed to extend it, are there right ways and wrong ways to do it? That takes some nuance.
Isn't that essentially the center of the debate in a lot of denominations and churches over the role of women, is how close is the revelation of Scripture versus how much is it pointing us in the direction and we should keep progressing? Isn't that the heart of the debate?
Yeah, I think in some places it is, and I know in some denominations, for example, don't just appeal to Paul for the way they talk about the role of women in ministry or the role of husband and wife in marriage. They appeal to creation account, and so it's not just the New Testament teaching, it's a biblical pattern. And so, one of this will get us off track pretty fast, but I think one of the the patterns in history that I'm most interested in is interpretation, and how what we assume is a given in one generation turns out to not be a given for another generation. And the way we interpret the Bible, since the Reformation has changed. The Reformation was a major change in interpretation, but we've come a long way since then on how we understand the kind of plain meaning of the Bible. And so I think that for issues like these, we've got, especially with women and issues like same-sex marriage and how churches will handle same-sex couples, it's got to be a lot of room for grace in the conversation. And but if we can't all take the scriptures seriously, then there's really not a lot to have a conversation about. And so I think that there's a really delicate balance to be struck in all that.
Okay, well, so enough of defining the question. What's the answer?
What's the answer?
Oh,
well, I can tell you this, that Paul lived in a world in which women were considered absolutely lower status than men, and not just legally, but morally and intellectually and in basically all ways inferior to women. Ancient Romans and ancient Jews did not agree about a lot of things, but they agreed that women were less valuable than men. And this actually touches on a lot of things. So in the chapter about homosexuality, for example, we talk about the fact that a freeborn Roman man could sleep with whoever he wanted, and it wasn't considered adultery unless he slept with a freeborn woman. So there's a very specific, requirements for him, but a woman couldn't sleep with anybody but her husband. So there's all kinds of double standard in the ancient world, really based on the fact that men were significant and women were not. And so we see throughout Roman literature in the time and Jewish literature in the time, women, it was considered a waste of time to educate women because they were not intellectually powerful enough to be educated, that they should stick to the things that they know how to do, which is housework, etc., and those kinds of things. Women were considered untrustworthy as far as being faithful in marriage, and so they needed chaperones to make sure that they didn't go sleep around and all of these kinds of things. And so
it's like the Taliban.
Yeah, it is like the Taliban, but that kind of sounds like what Paul is saying.
Yeah, so he has to be understood in this broader context, where when Paul says things like a woman should learn in quiet submission, what we emphasize is quiet submission, and sort of miss the fact that Paul is saying women should learn. And his Jewish counterparts would have disagreed with that, and his Roman counterparts would have disagreed with that. And what you find out on further investigation is that everybody was supposed to learn in quiet submission. And so basically what Paul is saying in a verse like that is not that women should learn in submission and men should not. It's that women should learn, and they should learn the way men do, which is in a classroom where everyone listens to the professor. Romans and Jews alike, beat students to make sure they paid attention. And fortunately, the early Christians were a little more lax on that particular thing. So Paul didn't advocate beating, but he did advocate quiet submission from students. There are, a lot of other places too where Paul is not explicit, but he says that women should not have authority over men, and at the end of several of his letters, he lists off the names of women that he calls co-workers with him in the gospel and co-laborers for the cause of Christ, and asks people to accept them as teachers. And so I think that this dovetails a little bit with the Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes book. There's a plug for the old one.
So read that one also.
There we go. We talk about the fact that I think in the ancient world, we assume here a rule is a fixed rule. So if I say a woman shouldn't teach over a man, then that means always in every situation. I think Paul would have said a woman shouldn't teach over a man as a general rule, because as we've seen, most women weren't educated, so they shouldn't teach. But if you have an educated woman that's capable, let her teach. And so there becomes, there's a lot of layers, I think, of
that almost
implies
that some of those things that we might be tempted to take as statements of sin, or it's a sin to allow this behavior to happen, are closer to Proverbs, closer to general statements of, in this culture, this shouldn't happen. If it does, it should happen like this.
Sure.
Is there always a danger in I don't know.
Simplifying?
Because Paul said this to this church or to this person in this church, that is now a command of God for all people for all time.
Narrowly, assigning it
Right.
a value. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think one of the things that we tend to do is to universalize, where Paul tells Corinthian women that they shouldn't speak in church. We take that to say that Paul was telling all women everywhere that they shouldn't speak in church. But it's very possible that something was happening in Corinth that we don't know about. And so those women should be quiet. And it's very possible that if we all knew what was going on, we would say, holy smokes, yeah, they should definitely be quiet. But what we run into when we read Paul is we're reading his letter to an audience that we've lost. And sometimes in those letters, he's responding to questions that they asked him in another letter, and we don't have that letter. So we're sort of listening to half of a phone call, and we're hearing the answers, but we're not always hearing the questions. And so again, that shouldn't make us suspicious or doubtful of the trustworthiness of Scripture, but it should make us humble and having really black and white answers to what he could possibly have meant.
That brings up a really interesting point, and I'm thinking about 1 Corinthians. In chapter 7, he's addressing a number of issues like, is it better to be married or single? Is it okay to be a slave or not? Should you be circumcised or not? All these details that apparently the Corinthians had asked him. But in the middle of the chapter, he talks about a general rule, and he says, this is my rule in all the churches. He's explicit that what I'm about to say doesn't just apply to you Corinthians. It applies to everybody I teach. But the fact that he even says that implies that there are other things I have said in this letter which are for you Corinthians, but may not be universally applied.
Well, otherwise he wouldn't have written Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
He
had different things to say.
Each of these churches have their own context, their own problems, their own challenges that he's addressing, but we do tend to automatically universalize all. And there's a lot that you can universalize without any risk. But especially when it comes to these issues of gender or church organization or the way to worship, it's hard to know what was particular in that context.
Well,
sorry. Yeah,
no, I think we like to use it oftentimes, or we have in the past, as a bludgeoning tool.
Yeah.
For our own
purposes.
Or because we just want specificity. I want to know exactly what am I supposed to eat for breakfast to please God? What
Clear
am I supposed to do for a work?
A rule book
to please God. Yeah. Is it okay to wear a Speedo if I'm on the swim team to please God?
No.
Thank you. Well, for me personally, no.
That is my rule in all the churches.
But you know what? You know what that does?
What?
That means if he was to give you that, then you wouldn't be developing a relationship.
Yeah.
You would want a rule
I want
book.
rules. I want rules. So then I can check him off, and then he has to bless me.
Right, that's easier.
He has to bless me. Didn't Sky write some book about?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Look up with online.
We're running out of time, but I thought it was interesting. And people can read the book to get all of these responses. I just wanted to dig into one or two specifically to show how it works. But in terms of slavery, so much has been said about Paul doesn't condemn slavery. He tells a slave to go back to his master. He says, slaves, obey your masters. And by using this kind of same technique of, okay, how was he distinct and how is he similar to the views on slavery at the time? Your conclusion is kind of similar, that he is pushing in a more progressive direction, that he's foreseeing a time where there's no such thing as slave or free, as male or female, that he's pushing in the direction of an ideal, not holding to what the view of the day was. Whereas in the chapter on homosexuality, it appears if you really read into the writings and the beliefs on homosexuality in the Roman world, that he's actually pushing in a more restrictive direction than was the standard of the day.
Well,
He's
that's
more conservative.
Confusing.
Well,
it's actually not when you think about
Well,
it.
what's confusing is that you're making an exception for one thing.
Well, no. I think what you see in the New Testament, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, is when it comes to the role of women in society and in the family and in the household and in the church, or when you talk about the value of a slave, he's progressive in saying these people are worth more than our culture is declaring. When it comes to sexuality and sexual behavior, he's much more restrictive and saying, as believers in Christ, your sexuality needs to be confined to this and not be as progressive as the culture is, which is very loose with.
Because in order for your value and your personhood to be sacred and special, you can't just throw that away. Whereas, like, he wants the people to be special and sacred and respected in the other ones. So it's kind of the same objective, just said differently. Did that make sense?
Yeah,
It really makes
I
sense.
wonder how
Possibly.
much of it is influenced by Paul's own Jewishness.
Studio audience, did that make sense? Yeah. Oh, we got was that a thumbs up or was that a so-so? Okay, we got some
Can
thumbs
you
up.
describe what I'm saying?
No, you got to read the whole book. It's not that
we
simple.
should encourage
It's not
people
that
to read the
simple.
book. I'm glad we talked about chauvinism, though, because it's so relevant today.
Yeah. Is it?
It is. It's hugely
Okay.
relevant.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, look
Well, good.
at where we are, people.
Look at our podcast.
I mean, Donald Trump put the show in chauvinism. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
he did.
Oh, hey, we got fans.
Do we
that are
have to bring
listeners.
him up?
I know we do. We have to.
It's inauguration week. Are you going to the inauguration, Brandon?
I will not be there. No.
You know what? I think Brandon and I spent the last inauguration together.
There?
I think, if I recall correctly,
Oh wow.
2008. Do you remember where we were on inauguration day? You don't remember? It was special, Brandon. It was
He
so
didn't
special.
remember until about 3 days later. He finally woke up and
Well, it's
remembered.
funny because we were in Las Vegas.
I think it was Vegas, wasn't it?
Las Vegas?
Remember?
Did you wake up
That
with
was
a
the
tiger
winter.
in your room?
It was either Vegas or Los Angeles or Miami. I remember we had 3 warm trips.
Yeah,
in
I think we were
January.
in Las
We
Vegas.
did
We
not
stayed at the
think about that.
MGM Grand.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And we had an interview with, what's his name? Craig Gross, wasn't it?
Yes, the Triple X Church or Church on the Strip.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So which of Paul's reputed bad behaviors were you guys most guilty of that weekend?
I don't think we were guilty of any of them, although we saw a lot of guilty
Twisting
people.
scripture?
Don't
And
pigeonhole.
maybe the safe.
Were you a killjoy in Vegas?
No.
Okay, I gotta sing.
You do. Sing it
Okay.
without that.
Thanks, Brandon, for teaching us all what we should think and not think about Paul, because it's easy to, when it comes to Paul, to get a little bit appalled, because when we're thinking that it's too small and that we just don't quite get it at all, even though Brandon's church is also small, and as far as I can tell from the webcam, he's not very tall. Still, Brandon has helped us all learn how to read the Bible better without our Western eyeballs and learn a little more about Paul. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Wow, my pleasure. That was a treat.
Thank you.
Good to have you back.
All you listeners, the book is called Paul Behaving Bradley. That's
Cooper.
You know, you
my,
really should learn
stepbrother.
your guest's work
Paul
before you do a
Behaving
podcast.
Badly by Randolph Richards and Brandon O'Brien. It's on sale now. You can go pick it up. If you want to support the podcast so that Sky can keep sneering at me while I play my ukulele, go to patreon.com/Phil Vischer and you can support us and get lots of behind the scenes stuff. Did you do a new movie proposal?
No.
Oh, okay. But you can watch last week's.
You can also watch Christian Asks.
And Christian Asks. There'll be a new Christian Asks up.
Yep.
And she's going to ask something.
Have some good relevant
I'm almost
questions.
positive.
And we'll have an interesting guest post on my website this week for an upcoming guest on the podcast, which really is about pastors behaving badly.
Oh,
So
wow.
you'll want to read my blog this week. Check it
I'm
out.
intrigued.
And don't you have a new book or something?
There's stuff.
No,
There's
he's
stuff
working
coming.
on it. It's
coming.
not done.
Oh.
Can't tell you about it. Okay. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
The Phil Vischer Podcast is produced by Phil Vischer Enterprises and recorded live at Jellyfish Lab Studios. This episode was edited by Jason Rugg and was fact-checked by absolutely no one. For more information, go to philvischer.com.